Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my stories of when I came into the world, and how I didn't know that there were people out there who could do this work. And the time when I did have a voice. And in my Cambodia, which is later on will become infamous for the killing fields, for the genocide that is one of the bloodiest genocide in the history of the world. In my Cambodia, however, in 1970, it was beautiful. It was a country with 2,000-year-old history, with arts and cultures and vibrancy and music and awesome food. I was also really privileged to come into the world to a father whose job as an entrepreneur, businessman, and military police officer afforded us lifestyle privilege. My parents believed that education, whether or not it afforded us jobs or different lifestyles, would make us different mothers. And my fondest memory of childhood in this beautiful Cambodia was of going to the theater with my parents and my 7 siblings, my 6 siblings and I, where in the dark I would sit on my father's lap, watching on the screen gods and goddesses and monkey kings fighting evils and injustices, holding my favorite movie food, fried crickets, much crunchier than popcorn. I grew up believing that life was charmed. I didn't know that while I was living this life, war had been raging in Vietnam and on the countryside in Cambodia. All I remember was on April 17, 1975, when I was 5 years old, the soldiers came into my home. They came and started screaming for us to leave our homes, telling us that Americans and their B-52 million killing birds were going to bomb our city, and if we didn't leave, we would all be killed. We didn't know who the Americans were. On that day, my city, Phnom Penh, the capital of Cambodia, populated by 2 million people, it was evacuated in 72 hours. And those who refused to leave, the soldiers and their guns went knocking on doors and shot them dead. And Cambodia would become a prison, and all the 7 million people living in it would become prisoners. Every single aspect of our lives were controlled, and we couldn't speak up. I was 6 when I knew I had to become dumb, deaf, mute, blind, invisible, just so I could have the privilege of staying alive. But because we knew my father was a politician, was a military police officer, we also knew we were in danger. For as long as I live, I will never forget the day the soldiers came for my father. And this is not the first time I've told the story, but each time it hurts just as much. The soldiers and their guns and their excuses that they needed him to go and remove an ox cart stuck in the mud. And when my father talked to my mother, she started crying and sobbing, a sound so heartbreaking that it paralyzed my brothers and sisters and I. And when my father came back out from the hut, one by one he picked up my brothers and sisters. And when it came to my turn, I had the instinct of mine to wrap my arms around him really tight. I can still remember my feet dangling in the air, feeling really helpless and small. And I rest my face at that nape of his neck so I could just whisper in his ears that I loved him. I knew in my child's heart I would never see my father again. I was 7 years old. For 3 days, I waited for my father. But on the 3rd day, I stopped praying for him to escape the soldiers' grasp. I began to pray that the gods have mercy on him, to make the soldiers use one of their bullets on him, and make his death quick and painless. Cambodia, a country the size of the state of Oklahoma, is today littered with over 20,000 mass graves. Over 1 million skulls have been accounted in these mass graves. Majority of them were not killed with bullets, which were deemed too expensive in that genocide. Majority of the people were killed with some kind of weapon smashing to the back of their head. I do not know what happened to my father. I've never seen or heard from him again. Imagine how that felt when 3 months after we were told that my father was executed, and my mother gathered my siblings and I around and said we had to leave her. She said we had to go and walk east, north, south, go find an orphanage, don't come back. Tell the supervisor of the orphanage that she was dead already. And when I didn't want to go, she turned me by my shoulders, pushed me out the door and said, "Get out. I don't want you. I cannot keep you." I was able to leave my mother, ended up at a child soldiers training camp. And all this time, they looked at my strength and my rage and said, "Too bad, you're not a boy. What wasted talent. Because if you were a boy, you could amount to something." And so I grew up even more afraid and more angry. We wanted to leave, we needed to leave Cambodia. And there were only 2 ways out of Cambodia back then. You had to walk the land, where we knew was littered with what the communist soldiers called the silent sentinels of death. These tiny weapon systems the size of a hockey puck, a compact powder, anti-personnel landmines. And we didn't want to risk stepping into these killing fields. We knew too many people who've been hurt by them. The only other way out was through the boat people's route. To do this, we had to raise 3 ounces of gold per person. My brother was only able to find enough gold, borrow enough gold to take 3 people out. He was to go. The oldest son of the oldest son, he was 21. His wife was to go with him. And he had to choose one of 4 siblings to take with him. Which one of your siblings would you take? I was the lucky child. And my brother start pedaling his bike away. And she started to run after the bike and our hands were still held. And there was that point where we knew if we didn't let go, she would pull me off. So she let go, screaming for me not to forget her. And I still dreamed of being reunited with my sisters in a few years. And then after 6 months, we were told we'd been picked to go to this place called America. And I didn't know what America was like, and the refugee workers would try to show us movies on big screens to show us what our new homes was going to be like. I was 10, I didn't speak English. I didn't know anything about America. But I knew I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be just like all the other people. During 4th of July, when our sponsor wanted to show us what America was like, share with us American culture, they took us to the 4th of July fireworks, which is not a good thing to do. Because just barely a year before, I was hiding in a real bomb shelter with real bombs exploding over my head. And when one hit the bomb shelter I was at, my best friend was hit, and she died right next to me. And to survive, I ran out of the shelter, brushing bits and pieces of her off my sleeve. But one time I tried to speak and tell people my story in junior high school. After I finished telling this little girl about my father being killed, executed, she looked at me and she said, "I don't believe you." That broke my heart again. How is it possible that she didn't believe me? And it not only made me feel bad because she thought I could have lied about such a thing. Imagine what would happen if those 600 or so estimated women who were persecuted, who were silenced, if they hadn't been removed from our world, if they could have been our first line of botanists and healers and environmentalists, imagine where we could be. And I returned in 1995 for the first time after college. And it was then that I realized I couldn't leave the war behind. Because after I left my brother, I was reunited with my brothers and sisters. Everywhere I went, in the markets, at the temples, the restaurants, I kept coming in contact with these beautiful people with strong smiles, resilient souls, and spirits. And they were missing part of their ribs, their arms, their legs, their face, their skulls. And I asked them what happened, and they told me about this weapon system called landmines, the size of a coffee cup. Once in the ground, stay active for decades. And it didn't matter if the footstep that stepped on it were friends or foe. Landmines, this weapon system, is known to be the second most painful injury, second to burns. Because when you step on a mine, everything below you, rocks, dirt, toenails, grass, bones, they shoot up into your legs, melting off. They work like secondary missile, disintegrating your flesh, and if you survive, 50% of people who step on mines die from blood loss before they get to help. If you survive, you have to have your limbs amputated. It's a lifetime of pains and scars. I knew how hard my parents worked so that I could live. Surviving war isn't just a matter of surviving the atrocity, the genocide. It took work and sacrifice and strategies. But so many people are now having a hard time surviving the peace. The peacetime when they should focus on working the land, on heal themselves and growing their nation, they are having hard time surviving the peace. How lucky are we that we can leave this campus and hike and swim and walk to school and not have to worry that our next step will not be our last. Millions of people in the world are not that fortunate. I knew then I wanted to get involved. And I am so thankful that I went and joined the U.S. campaign to ban landmines. The international campaign to ban landmines, which the U.S. was part of, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997. And at our centers in Cambodia, this group that I joined, the Veterans International, we have centers where every day we manufacture prosthetic limbs, arms, legs, orthotics, wheelchairs to help victims of wars and victims of landmines have mobility. And I started in college when I protested the first Gulf War, when I protested against apartheid. It was where I learned skills to organize, to speak out. It was also where I learned to find my voice. I hope I leave you with this, and you know this already because of who you are, is that peace is not an automatic. It is not something we desire and expect to be delivered. It is not something we want expected to be granted. It is an action, or rather many, many, many actions. And I am so grateful that when I couldn't speak up, somebody else did. When I was silenced, somebody else screamed. When I was hiding in a bomb shelter, somebody else stood up. Somebody just like you. Somebody whose work gave my family a chance not only to survive the war, but survive the peace. When I was scared, someone else reached the hand to help us. And as a result of that, I was given the opportunity to not just see the worst of man's inhumanity to man, examples that made me want to hurt and hate, but I was shown the best of man's humanity to man. And that healed the wounds in my heart and made me want to be a better person and to help create a better world for all of us. I'll leave it at that and take your questions. Thank you.